So for this project, I'm going to be trying to use AI to assist in and see how well it does at conducting its own critical inquiry into a question. So I started just by asking, right now I'm using ChatGPT 3.5, but I'll probably switch to 4 at some point, or maybe go back and forth and just compare at different points. But I just asked it to start off if it could guide me in conducting a critical inquiry, just to see where its kind of baseline was if I didn't give it any context. And it gave me a step-by-step guide. This took about 30 seconds for it to come up with, and started. It's fairly straightforward of defining the research question, gathering information, evaluating sources, analyzing the information, coming up with a thesis, identify key arguments and evidence, organize your ideas, engage in critical thinking, synthesize, write your inquiry, revise and edit, cite sources, reflect and review. So, I mean, I don't think there's a whole lot wrong with what it says, but I'm going to ask more specifically about, how familiar it is with our specific critical inquiry method from the textbook. All right, so he's familiar in general, but doesn't have specific information about their method from their textbook. I think I'll switch to 4.0 and see if that gives me anything different. Okay, so now I've asked ChatGPT 4 about this. I've said, can you describe Bailin and Battersby's critical inquiry method? And it is doing a better job. Maybe I should try asking this exact same question to ChatGPT and seeing if it was just part of the phrasing. But it says questioning and problem defining, which is similar to what was said before, but it is accurate for this. Gathering information, analyzing, interpreting, evaluating evidence and sources, inferencing, considering alternative perspective, forming judgments, reflecting on the process. So I don't really know how to feel about this. I'm curious what the authors would think of this definition or this explanation. I mean, it's saying that these are some key aspects of their method, so I guess it's not saying that this is like the specific process. And I'm curious where it's sourcing this information from. So I don't know if this is trying to source it from the Reason and the Balance textbook, or maybe there's other writings that it's basing this off of. So I'm going to ask it that. But when I look at the guidelines for inquiry from the textbook, saying like it has these guiding questions, so maybe I'll ask it specifically for those guiding questions. What is the issue? What kinds of claims or judgment are at issue? What are the relevant reasons and arguments on various sides of the issue? What is the context of the issue? And how do we comparatively evaluate the various reasons and arguments to reach a reasoned judgment? So, okay, first I think I'll ask where it's basing this information off of. So I'm still not 100% sure. It's saying that this is, it may have misunderstood my question. It's saying, the information about this is based off of general principles and practices widely recognized in the field. And so they're central to many models. They might have unique or particular focuses from other models, but it's recommending, at least for me, to go to their own writing. So I think I'll ask it now, if it's basing it off of its specific writing or not. So I'm going to ask it, are you basing your description of their method off of their original works? No. Yeah, so it's giving just general critical thinking principles. So it might just not have access to it. So I think maybe I'll try giving it access to that. But before I do that, I'm just going to ask it if it knows what their guidelines for inquiry are. So comparing with their textbook, that's tough to say. It does feel fairly general still. Define the problem with the question, matching with what is the issue is that's pretty good. What kinds of claims or judgment are at issue? They don't really talk about the type of judgments. I don't think at all. Or sorry, it doesn't talk about the kind of judgments. And yeah, so it's kind of generally a bit there, but it doesn't seem like it's specifically there. So I might play around with this a little bit more before giving it, like feeding it some of the actual information, but it seems like it has kind of a general awareness of critical thinking, but not specific to the authors anyways. So I was trying to figure out what the best way to inform ChatGPT of their methods would be. And I don't have an access to the digital version of their textbook, and I would feel a bit odd about uploading, part of a textbook or something like that into ChatGPT. But they have an open access paper that summarizes kind of the approach taken in the textbook and goes over the key points. This is really exactly what I was hoping to find, was something that's relatively concise but gives a really strong overview of what the book is in their own words. So I'm going to see if I can upload this to ChatGPT and see if it will revise its answers based off of that. Okay, so I've told it that I'm going to upload one of their papers, and that summarizes their critical inquiry approach, and then I'm going to have it try to describe the process again. And it says, absolutely, please go ahead and upload the papers. I'm going to do that now. All right, so far it's doing all right. Okay, so I'm actually pretty happy with how it did here. So it has looked at the document and now given a response of what its understanding is based off of that. So the key aspects are, I'm not sure if they're word for word quotes from the document, but they do go over key aspects of the text here that are in line with what it gives here. I'm not going to go too deep into the nitty-gritty of if it's exactly on point, but I mean, at face value, this seems right. The dialectical dimension of critical thinking, dialectical aspect of inquiry, inquiry into specific contexts, emphasis on the spirit of inquiry, and then it gives the guiding questions, which are from later on in the article here, and it was able to extract those without me specifically prompting it for that part to give these questions. So yeah, now we've got a decent starting point. I'm going to try experimenting with what we can do from here. Actually, even before we do that, I think I might have it try to reflect on its own misunderstanding. So now I'm saying, based on what you read, based on what you just read, can you reflect on the accuracy of your original responses? And we'll see what it has to say. Yeah, so it's picking up that it didn't comment on the dialectical aspect of critical thinking originally, or dialogical inquiry. Yeah. So it's basically commenting on all 5 things that it put in its new response, and just saying that it didn't emphasize these things. And I appreciate the its guiding questions comment that the 5 guiding questions are specific and central to their method, and its original response did not include those particular questions, which are crucial for understanding their approach to critical thinking. So, yeah, again, at face value, I feel like it's seeing the difference here. Its initial description are applicable to many approaches, but their Bailin and Battersby has distinctive features that were not captured in its original response. So this is a pretty good starting point. So I think what I'll do now is say if I wanted to conduct an inquiry using their method, how could you assist and guide me in that process? Oh, this is great. So it's giving me, here's the different steps of their method, or in different parts of their method, and it's giving specific ways that it can help with each one. So identifying the issue, this is what it is, and begin by defining the question you want to explore, and I can help refine the question to ensure it's specific and meaningful. So this was what I was thinking is, I have a question in mind, but I haven't been able to phrase it exactly the way I want to. I haven't quite been able to capture exactly what I'm trying to get at, and so that was my first thought, was that I would start by saying, here's the question I want to explore, and asking it to help me generate better ways of phrasing that, or give some critiques on my draft phrasing. Understand the kinds of claims or judgments. I can assist in identifying the nature of these claims and their implications. Exploring relevant reasons and arguments. I can support by finding relevant information, data, and arguments from different sources. And I was actually, I absolutely was going to do that. Obviously, you need to be careful because sometimes it can make up sources, but we'll see. It should be able to actually provide links to legitimate sources that we can fact check. And contextualizing the issue. Can provide background information and context to deepen the understanding of the issue. It can help evaluate the logic, evidence, and coherence of the arguments presented. This, the other ones, I do think it will be able to help us identify some information. It's kind of similar to using Wikipedia in that way, that you really need to, you can't trust it too much, but you can fact check what it's saying and go to the sources. But it can really help lead you to those sources. But when it's talking about evaluating the reasons and arguments, that is something I think will be it'll be fairly strong at, and especially if we give it specific prompts about identifying fallacies or errors in reasoning and things like that. So engaging in the dialogical process can aid in organizing these discussions and highlighting key points of contention or agreement. Okay, that one's maybe a little bit more abstract, but yeah, and this reflecting on the inquiry process, I can help in this reflective process by asking probing questions and offering an external perspective. And this is something that is not it's not people's first thought about using AI, but it is quite effective. It is that you can be having a dialogue with AI, and similar to talking to a human, you can't trust everything that it has to say, but just having that dialogue, AI makes a very good discussion partner for this kind of thing. Alright, so now I'm going to tell it that I have a topic of inquiry in mind, and I'm going to have it guide me through Bailin and Battersby's critical inquiry process and ask it if it can do that. So alright, so it's asking me to share the topic or issue I have in mind, and then we'll start the process from there. So I've been struggling to form this question exactly right, and so I'm just going to tell it the topic and not give it really any further direction. I want to see what it does without kind of too much guidance. I don't want to guide it to guide me in the process. So I'm curious to see how good of a job it does if I'm just kind of thinking out loud a little bit more. But so the topic I have is quite provocative, and I don't want it to be a leading question, um, but what I'm curious about is whether or not education systems or any part of that can ever be accurately described as a form of slavery, having to do with like student rights and student autonomy and um, things like that. And so I've been struggling to frame this question in a way that I feel is, um, you know, accurately representing the issue or what I'm trying to get into. Um, and so I'm just going to see what it has to say. Oh, I appreciate the compliment. Hmm. Okay, so I was kind of expecting it to just go step by step, and so maybe I'll clarify that afterwards. But maybe it might just be giving me an overview of each step before we get started. Um, yeah, it does seem like that's kind of it's kind of taking me through the full process. So as we proceed, feel free to ask to share any specific thoughts, sources, or aspects that you would like to focus on. So identifying the issue at hand. Let's clarify what aspects of education systems and what characteristics of slavery we are considering in this comparison. Yeah. So I don't disagree there. I'm not sure if that's like the most helpful way of phrasing that yet, but maybe it's not kind of started that process yet, so I'll have to see. Um, Understanding the kind of claims, we'll need to consider what is meant by slavery in a historical and contemporary context and what characteristics define an education system. So yeah, this I do totally agree with this. I think that's maybe it's part one. Felt a little bit more like what part two is really understanding those claims. So I appreciate what it's saying about part two. Oops. We should gather arguments and various perspectives on the issue. Might include educational theorists, historians, sociologists, and those with first-hand experience in different education systems. Are there any known arguments or sources you're already considering? Yeah, so that's a good probing question. Contextualizing the issue. Yeah, that influence perceptions and realities of both education and slavery. Yeah, and I think that's I think why I'm struggling with this question is because I know that there is going to be so much perception read into exactly the way that that question is phrased. So I'm curious what kind of insight or nuance it'll be able to pick up there. Okay, so I feel pretty good about that. I kind of wish that it gave me a bit of a prompt here for what it's looking for at this point, but I think I'm just going to say like, okay, I'm ready to begin and see what it does. Okay, so it's giving me the entire process again. So I think I need to be more specific and just ask it to say like let's just do part one, or let's just do the first step together. And I think what I might end up doing after trying this the first time is creating a specific GPT for this. So one of the newer features in ChatGPT is that you can create your own versions of ChatGPT where you essentially feed it a bunch of initial information. So I would feed it that open access paper about their method, and then explain to it what its role was and what I wanted it to do. So kind of this process right now is essentially what I'd be doing kind of in there in a certain way, but saying like, or describing what I want it from it. I want you to be able to, your role is to be something that guides someone through this process in a step-by-step manner. So this is kind of just getting a feel for what it would do naturally, and then once I have a better understanding of that, I could try making a specific GPT that would, potentially rather than you asking an initial question, it could start with a prompt right away and say, all right, like I'm your inquiry bot, I'm your inquiry AI, and first tell me the topic or question that you'd like to inquire into, and we're going to follow this method, and then it would guide you through step by step. So we're going to having to do this the hard way a little bit. Yeah, so it kind of just repeated what it said before. So, okay, there we go. Okay, so now it's saying though at the end, let's start with the first step, defining and clarifying the key aspects of your education system and slavery in the context of your question. Okay, so I'm just going to say, how would you go about step 1 for this topic? Okay, defining education systems. What are the structural elements of education systems we are considering? Compulsory education, grading systems, curriculum. Yeah, those are good questions. What are the stated goals or purposes of education systems? Knowledge transmission, skill development, socialization. Yeah, those are good philosophical education questions. How are these systems implemented? Teaching methods, discipline, student-teacher relationships. Defining slavery. Historical definition of slavery. A system where individuals are owned by others, deprived of personal freedom, and compelled to perform labor or services. Contemporary understanding. Consider how the term slavery is understood and used in modern context. Does it refer solely to its historical definition or their broader metaphorical uses? Yeah, so that is a charged topic. I mean, charged topic, but also just a interesting topic. Clarifying the inquiry. Identify specific aspects of the education system that might be compared to slavery. Lack of autonomy. So, formulating sub-questions. In what way might certain features of education system be compared to aspects of slavery? Okay, so again, I kind of wish it would give me a more specific prompt here. It is saying, please share any specific thoughts or aspects you'd like to focus on in this step. Your input will help tailor our exploration to. So that's not a bad prompt, actually. So I'm going to think about this for a minute and ask it another question. Okay, so I just tried to get my thoughts out about, why it is that I'm having trouble with this step. And so I just said that I've been struggling to phrase the question in a way that I'm happy with. I think my real goal here is to identify if there are any examples of things in the education system that infringe on things we would typically consider human rights. My suspicion is that there are things that do infringe on human rights, but they are considered justified because they are being done to children, not adults. Though there are meaningful differences between children and adults, this does seem similar to the way slavery was justified through dehumanization. I think most people would be opposed to certain educational practices being done to adults, and I would like to examine if we are justified in doing them to children. And I'm now saying, based on this information, do you have any suggestions? And, this is the thing I've been struggling to put into a concise question, and so I'm curious what it will do with this. Like I said before, just having this dialogue with AI, this is something that I had spinning in my mind, last week, that I was struggling to put fully into words. Having that dialogue in this way was helpful in that. I did have a lot of these thoughts somewhat identified, but writing them out in this way, just this part already, it is helpful. Yeah, so actually one thing that I did think came out of that discussion already that was newer from my previous thoughts was just that maybe using maybe focusing on human rights versus slavery might be a better way to go. There's a part of me that likes that slavery is a little bit inflammatory, in that it might get people to think about it a little bit more, but I think talking about human rights is similarly provocative without maybe without maybe getting into some of the connotations, and might cause people to close off less to it. So it's saying that based on your refined focus, seems that you're interested in exploring the potential of infringement on human rights within education systems, especially as how they relate to children as opposed to adults. Snow's approach allows us to examine the ethical considerations of educational practices and their justification when applied to children. Here's how you can proceed with your clarified goal following the Bailin and Battersby method. A refined focus question might be, are there practices within education systems that infringe upon what are typically considered human rights, and are these practices ethically justifiable when applied specifically to children? Okay, well that seems kind of wordy, but it's not. I think it is kind of along the right lines, and this is one of the things I quite like about working with AI is that that it gave me, like, even though I'm not really satisfied with this question, it gave me a starting point that I can work from. It would have taken me a while to even, write that sentence out. It took me a while to write the paragraph, but then trying to put that into a question even like this still would have taken me some time. Identifying key concepts and definitions, what constitutes a human right in this context, and I totally agree with that. That is something I was thinking I would need to investigate into. Clarify the specific educational practice of interest, compulsory education, disciplinary methods, standardized testing. Yeah, so I will give it some context for that, but that is one of the things that I don't have a specific, like, these certain practices are what I think are incorrect. That's part of what the inquiry is. So yeah, I guess clarify maybe isn't quite the right word that I would think. I think it'd be more like investigate practices that might be considered that. Yeah, to give some example things for perspective and so on. Okay, so maybe what I'll do at this point is I think I'm going to ask it to try and do it on its own and see what it comes up with. I think it has enough context at this point to understand what it is that I'm trying to get at. So I'm gonna have it do it on its own and see what happens. Okay, so the prompt I've given it now is that I think it has enough context to perform the critical inquiry on its own. Please conduct each step of the inquiry and write about each step of your process. Be mindful to follow Bailin and Battersby's more general guidelines as well, such as the importance of the spirit of inquiry. I'm kind of nervous that it might just go step by step and kind of forget about some of those other things. And I've asked it to include comments about how it's applying those aspects of the process as it goes as well. So let's see what it comes up with. Alright, so step one. See if I'm happy with that. Are there practices within education systems that infringe upon what are typically considered human rights, and are these practices ethically justifiable when applied specifically to children? So you know what, I think that's exactly what I said before, and maybe I'm just coming around to it a bit now. I do think it's a little bit wordy. I feel like it could maybe be a little bit punchier if we are going to describe that to somebody else, but I think that that's fair for the here. And it's commenting that in refining this question, I maintain an open-minded approach, considering that educational practices might have both positive and negative aspects in terms of human rights. And I totally agree with that, and I think that that's one of my concerns was that, I did want to raise, some alarms if there are practices that are not justifiable, but obviously it's not that. I don't think it'd be fair to consider education in general as a form of slavery or a human right violation. I think that there's just my suspicion is that there's just parts of it that are unethical. But so yeah, I appreciate the way that it identified the inquiry question, anyways. All right, so my first immediate feedback is just thinking that this seems a bit brief, but I mean, it's easy to read at this point. So identifying key concepts and definitions, human rights. Rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of age. Key rights include the right to education, right from discrimination, and the right to personal liberty. So obviously the right to education is, well, I guess that could be infringed upon in certain ways if the education system's not effective. But discrimination, yeah, I think probably personal liberty is the one that's most at play. But I do actually think that the right to education could be an interesting one to explore as well, because not all children, even in the same class, receive the same education. Um, so yeah, I think that immediately, like off the bat, that I do think that that's kind of a helpful starting point. Again, I don't know my human rights off the top of my head, so I would again have to fact check that even like, that these seem like human rights, but I'd have to double check that before I was super confident in going off of it. Educational practices. These include compulsory education, disciplinary methods, standardized testing, and overall curriculum structure. Yeah, I mean, compulsory. I don't disagree with any of those. I do think that there's probably more um, things that could be listed there. In identifying these concepts, I aim to be fair-minded, acknowledging that the complexity and nuances of both human rights and education. Okay, well, I feel like his reflection there is weak, but oh well. Gathering perspectives and information. Researching various sources, including human rights, legislation, educational policy, and schools. Yeah. So maybe it's getting confused here. Now it's kind of saying like this is what the process would be, but I don't think that it actually did that. Um, so I'll have to kind of see what it comes up with. I might have to give it more prompting. Exploring ethical and legal standards. Analyzing documents like United Nations Convention on the Rights of a Child. So yeah, this is a document that I don't know about. So assuming that that's a real thing, that's would be a great thing for me to look into. Considering ethical theories in education, such as those that prioritize autonomy, welfare, or societal good. Yeah, that seems like something reasonable to look into. It's not giving me a ton of direction, but it's a bit. Comparing practices in education with human rights norms. Yeah. Yeah, okay, so here now we've gotten to like, based on the analysis determining whether, so it's just describing what this would be hypothetically at this point, but not actually doing it itself. So I think I'm just going to give it that feedback and see if it is able to actually do it not hypothetically. So I'm saying it seems like you've outlined the process and what the process would look like hypothetically, but you have not actually conducted the inquiry. Could you conduct this? Could you actually conduct this inquiry and come up with a reasoned judgment? So I'm not sure if it will actually go through each step at this point, but I really want it to come up with a reasoned judgment. So I guess we'll see what it does with that. I think I might have confused it by first saying like I want you to guide me through this process, and then saying conduct it itself. So if I start a new conversation with it and just kind of from the get-go ask it to be doing this, it might do better. So gathering perspective and information, I reviewed scholarly articles and documents on children's rights, educational theory, and ethical considerations in education. So I don't know, again, I don't know if it actually did that or if it's just saying it did that. But if it did, then that's great. The information reflects both the necessity of structured education for societal and individual development and concerns about restrictive and coercive practices. Okay, so both necessity and also concerned about restrictive or coercive practices. Now it's saying that document I mentioned earlier emphasizes the right to education and protection from exploitation, but also highlights the need for guidance and protection, acknowledging the unique status of children. So I think that's maybe why I think that slavery was maybe not the right term, was because slavery does kind of have this exploitative aspect to it, where you're trying to get like labor out of someone else. So I do think that this has helped refine that question away from that. Um, so comparing education practices and education with human right norms. Compulsory education can be seen as infringing on personal liberty, but it is justified as necessary for personal and societal development. Strict disciplinary methods could conflict with the right to humane treatment, depending on severity and nature of the discipline. Yeah, so it's kind of going about, well, okay, I guess when it's saying strict disciplinary methods, my mind is going towards more like, capital punishment, or like very overtly unethical disciplinary methods. Um, but I'm curious about what it thinks about that, because I think even like disciplinary methods such as, like keeping a student in from recess, or the um, if you're late for class, or you're like, you don't, whatever. I could see how there could be aspects of um, that are more subtle, but I think that I'm just nervous that what it's describing here is things that like anyone would obviously object to, and that like wouldn't fly in most um, like first world countries. So yeah, I'd have to see what it means by that. And I think that that's more like what I'm thinking of, is these kind of things that fly under the radar in first world countries, and that are just kind of taken for granted. Evaluating justifications and arguments. The arguments for compulsory education and structured discipline are based on long-term benefits for children's development and societal welfare. These justifications are generally seen as ethically sound when balanced against children's right to protection and guidance. I mean, it hasn't provided any detailed reasons for that, so I guess I might just need to ask it for more specific steps. But cultural norms significantly influence perceptions of acceptable educational practices. Society differs in how they balance children's autonomy against perceived need for guidance and structure. So its reasons judgment is that it seems that while certain educational practices may superficially appear to infringe on human rights, most are ethically justifiable when considering the unique developmental needs of children and the societal context. However, this justification is contingent on these practices being implemented in a manner that respects the dignity, well-being, and developmental needs of children. Okay, well, I like that clarification, that it's this like contingent on this, but then I feel like that's actually maybe like the real issue. That in theory school is fine, but it's this contingency part that's like the real problem. So at this point, I don't feel like it's really gotten anywhere super interesting. Um, it's kind of just pretty general, I suppose. And reflecting, balancing complex ethical considerations and varying perspectives. Potential biases include the cultural context of the sources and the inherent challenges in comparing children and adults' rights. So, in conclusion, while some practices may raise concerns when viewed, they generally align with ethical standards. Okay, so it's being super general. I think that that's just my going to be like, could you give specific examples of practices that would infringe? Maybe I'll say of current educational practices that are not ethically justifiable. So I guess maybe what I'm feeling like is I feel like it's kind of missing the point, because I think that like the general answer is not what I'm looking for. That really I think is more of an exploratory inquiry into like trying to identify specific practices that are, even though that's a little bit leading. I like what it's saying. I don't disagree with it. Like if we are looking for educational practices that do align with human rights, like we will obviously find them, and most of them will. But I think that there are some that don't, and that's what I think needs to be kind of inquired into. And so, kind of giving a general answer kind of missed that point. So, even though I feel like this maybe is like a little bit leading or something, I think that really is maybe the question, and maybe that is the question I'm trying to inquire into. What are specific examples of practice? Are there specific examples of practices of current educational practices that are not ethically justifiable? No, okay, I guess I've messed up the wording of my question there. That's why I was stumbling over it. But um, excessive standardized testing can create undue stress, stifle creativity, neglect individual learning differences, may undermine the right to a holistic and individualized education. I mean, like, I mean, I don't completely disagree, but that does kind of feel like a response that just is like, well, that's something that's not good about our testing system, but I don't think that its explanation of it is super nuanced. Um, Zero tolerance policies and harsh disciplinary practices, like suspensions and expulsions for minor infractions, disregard the context of the child's behavior, deny them the right to the education, and to be treated with dignity. Lack of accommodation for special needs. So this is one that I was kind of getting at before, that kind of infringes on the right to an education, is if there's a lack of accommodation for special needs, or just a lack of accommodation in general. If there's a student who's behind for just more personal reasons or whatever, that they might not receive a quality education. Invasive surveillance and privacy intrusions. Yeah. Educational neglect in certain regions. Lack of resources, teacher shortages, poor infrastructure could lead to substandard educational conditions. Could deprive them for a right to equality. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was commenting on earlier. Though, yeah, I feel like it's kind of missed the point of it, of what I was trying to get at in some way. So, yeah, I think I might need to. Maybe I jumped the gun, or maybe it was still good to kind of see what it came up with on its own. But this is where I think just asking it to do it on its own, it needed some more guidance. I feel like with more prompting, I could have got some better stuff out of it. But maybe I'll go back to trying to have it guide me in my own inquiry.